Welcome to AthleticDirectorU. My name is David Chadwick with RealRecruit. We have an awesome segment today with Patrick Nero, the former athletic director at George Washington University, and Tanya Vogel, the current athletic director and former SWA. Today's topic is focusing on risk management, and specifically, how do you build a healthy culture and a relationship between the athletic director and SWA? The athletic director and SWA is an interesting relationship where oftentimes an athletic director is held accountable for issues that might surface with an athletic department, but the SWA is on the front lines and specifically building relationships with campus and those constituents over there. So very blessed to have you guys today, and we're excited to dig into some of your experiences and obviously share that information with other athletic directors. So I want to start with just some of the habits that you guys had as a part of your relationships and what you found to be helpful when dealing around specific issues that might surface within athletic departments.
Well, I would say, probably for me in working with Tanya over the years was just, the continuous building of our relationship. It was very clear the first moment that we met that we had such a shared belief of what an experience should be like at George Washington University for our student athletes. And so just that importance of the value that she brought to our program as a former student athlete, as a former coach, and then eventually an administrator, we were able to build such a trusting relationship over the years that guided how we worked together once she became our Senior Associate Athletic Director, SWA.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, your athletic director has to create an opportunity for dialogue. And, with Patrick and myself, it might have been the 2 p.m. coffee walks or, walking meetings that we would have just to be able to share things that were going on. And if you don't have that open relationship, if the opportunities for that dialogue haven't been facilitated, there could be tremendous risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned walking meetings and dialogue and things along those lines. Anything that you would share initially of things that you would have done differently or things that you learned from your relationship that helped you grow towards the tail end of your working relationship?
I don't think there's anything I would have done differently. Patrick made it easy for me when I got back to campus as his senior woman. He made it very clear what my responsibilities were, so he set expectations. And then, like I said, we had these mechanisms, whether it was one-on-one meetings or our walking meetings, or just the opportunity to shoot him a text and say, hey, something's going on, and be able to jump on a phone call. That accessibility and that freedom to know that what I was seeing was important to him, and it's my job. As a senior woman, it is your job to be on the front lines. It is your job to be able to say, okay, this is something that my athletic director needs to know about. So there's nothing we would have done differently. I think his ability to put me at ease right away and set expectations was really important.
Yeah, I think in any organization, your leadership position, relationships are going to be really not much different than any other type of strong relationship that you have in your life. And just like any of those relationships, they change and they develop. And so even our communication and the way we communicated changed and developed over the years. Starts very, very formal because I was a believer. I was taught in formal communication, so there's a set meeting every week, and because you want to continue to create an environment to communicate. But then it did grow to more of that informal, the ability to just go for a walk, a phone call at night to say, okay, this happened. Are we both good with it? Yeah. So I think sometimes the challenge can be, you get, if the relationship is strong. You're always trying to think what exactly would this person do in that situation. So sometimes you want to make sure that you're not always have the same opinion or assume that the same opinion, because I do think that is. I'm very proud, and I know Tanya is, of the relationship that we were able to build and how that impacted our student athletes. And so I don't think you would change it, but you always review it and say, okay, well, what could be the opposite of that? And there it might have been like, oh, well, all right, well, sometimes, we had become so aligned, would there be another outside opinion?
Yeah.
And did you have specific things that you did that you found helpful with empowering Tanya to take on this role that she had, and specifically being the Title IX coordinator and having those key relationships with campus?
Yeah, I think in regards to the Title IX piece, certainly, over the past few years, we've all been trained to take certain matters very, very seriously. And I think any time something had come across my desk that I thought, okay, well, this is a Title IX issue. Now, as you said, there weren't many things that came across my desk that I didn't ask her opinion on, but we didn't. At times, you don't want to overwhelm who you consider your partner there, and so. But I think any time it was a Title IX issue, that was certainly something I would say right to myself. Go in if her door was a little bit cracked open, I'd sneak in, and she might be eating lunch at her desk, but I'm like, I just need a minute. So I think any Title IX issues are certainly something you want to get right over to your SWA, if that's your Title IX coordinator in your department, and say, what are your thoughts here? What do you think? What should we do?
And you mentioned things coming across your desk. How did that typically happen as an athletic director? Was it people coming in to meet with you? Was it just hearing things within the department of murmurs? Or how did you typically find out about things as they were going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of our job is to set up mechanisms to allow you to get that feedback. And so the traditional route has always been the senior exit interviews, but I think we're all learning that's not necessarily a best practice. And so right when I came back on board, Patrick had already started this initiative to make sure that all of our student athletes knew who their sport administrators are. I mean, we've got 27 sports at GW and over 500 student athletes. So it was really important that the students knew who their point person was in the administration. And once we had established that, I think we probably found out as much through exit surveys and culture surveys as we did students just walking in the door of their sport administrator or their senior woman or to Patrick. But a lot of times it was students, staff. We also did a lot of training with our support staff and head and assistant coaches to make sure that they knew that when they saw something that they had some questions about, that they felt free to come forward and speak to us about those things.
So did you have something to add?
Yeah, I would just say we're in a really good period of change within intercollegiate athletics. I think for so many years, student athletes really didn't feel like they should have a mechanism, or they did have a mechanism or a voice in kind of what their experience was like. And that was really so driven just kind of by their day-to-day experience with their coaching staff. And so, I think it's the job of the athletic directors to try to find a real good place in between of saying, okay, we need good, appropriate feedback from our student athletes, yet at the same time allow our coaches, to have their own style and do what they have to do to run their programs. And so trying to develop that culture within an athletic department, I do think is critical, because the expectations of how a coach conducts him or herself today is very different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And I think everyone agrees that's a good thing. But just finding out, okay, how do we do that so that it opens up really good dialogue between all the interested parties is very important.
Absolutely. And it's evolving. I mean, the NCAA for years, exit interviews was the best practice on your way out. Tell us how things are going. I think it shifted to, like you said, surveys. And now the question is, are end-of-year surveys enough to truly detect things as they're going on? You touched on sport administrators, which I want to expand on a little bit. Critical role of this person being the point of contact for many student athletes. How did you guys, as senior level administrators and now both athletic directors, empower your sport administrators, train your sport administrators on how to be involved with their student athletes and help address issues if they are going on?
I mean, I think when I really, as Tanya said earlier, I think it really became clear to us that we were of a large program that was growing. And so we went from about 350 student athletes to about 500 student athletes in 2 years. And so it really became critical that as many of our administrators that we felt were capable, that they became more involved in that sport administrative role. And then we also found that we had to make sure, as I said earlier, that regular communication was there. So they had to build that very good, strong, trusting relationship with the head coach. But they also had to be visible and find ways to have avenues of communication with the student athletes. And the student athletes had to see them as somebody that they could trust and somebody they could go to if they had a concern or a question that they might not feel comfortable going to a coach with.
So I want to expand on the coaching angle. Tanya, you have a very unique perspective, having been student athlete, coach, and now AD. How do you handle coaches that are apprehensive, hypersensitive to the idea of student athletes being able to report concerns and issues and things along those lines? How do you have effective conversations with coaches when those concerns do surface?
Yeah, well, it starts long before a concern surfaces. It should start in the hiring process, being able to have open dialogue with the people that you're recruiting to become your head coaches about what your values are at the institution. And so as long as you're upfront during the hiring process, those expectations have been set. But it's ongoing, building trust. Just as building trust and open dialogue mechanisms for the AD and the SWA are important, that same type of relationship building has to happen between sport administrators and coaches. Sport administrators aren't just there for the students, right? They are there to be, in many ways, the administrator. Yeah. The support person for their head coaches. So that relationship building starts, like I said, during the hiring process, and it's ongoing. We spent a lot of time actually setting expectations of sport administrators almost in an educational or training format so that there was some standard level of expectation that our coaches understood they were going to receive. And I think as we did that, coaches started to see consistency. Okay, it doesn't matter which person is my sport admin. It doesn't have to be a former coach. It doesn't have to be a 20-year professional. I could have a first-year administrator, and they're going to get a basic level of support. But again, I want all of our coaches, and Patrick instilled this in us, we want our coaches to know that we are there for them. And if you're building that trust and building that relationship, then a coach understands when a student comes in to express a concern, the first thing I'm going to ask that student is, have you talked to your coach about this? Sure. We're not going to put our coaches out on an island and say, yeah, come in and just vent to us and we're going to solve your problem for you. We're really going to look at it, okay, well, have you talked to your coach about this? And if not, well, why? Yeah. And really try to encourage that student to find the courage to go in and have a good conversation with their coach. That's part of their training as well.
Mm-hmm. I do think, as Tanya said, building that culture of trust between the head coach and their sport administrator is really important. And then also from the position or the role of the athletic director. So we would do a monthly meeting with all the head coaches and all the sport administrators and talk through issues together as a group. And then at the end of every season, setting it up so that there's a recap or review of the season with the athletic director, the head coach, and the sport administrator. So all three are in the room and they're all on the same page. And then as you have that recap meeting, it's also talking about what are the future expectations of the program in every way. So understanding ahead of time between the AD and the sport administrator, okay, as we go into this end of the season meeting with our head coach, what are the things that we want to both be on the same page so that that coach realizes one of the things you want to be very careful about is that because as an athletic director, just because you have sport administrators doesn't mean that you don't have to have a relationship with your head coaches. That does not serve you well. And so you want to make sure through consistent communication that the three folks are all on the same page. Your head coach, your sport administrator, and your athletic director about the expectations and the feedback on that particular sport.
So obviously we're still talking about coaches, but the focus of this is risk management. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier, Patrick, just how things can come across your desk, people walking in your office and telling you something or getting it through an anonymous report. When it does err on the side of something serious, what's the action plan that you guys have found to be effective when it does come through and it's something that you do need to look into from that perspective?
Yeah, I think it depends on what it is.
Sure.
Obviously, if it has anything related to Title IX, we're picking up the phone and calling people across campus. That's, in truth, it's not just Title IX anymore. There's usually an assessment of what is the issue. Are there legal implications? Are there student rights and responsibility implications? And so figuring out, and usually, a lot of times it would be Patrick and I would sit down and say, okay, who else on campus needs to know? Athletics, this is a great thing. We can't function in a silo anymore. We can't function on an island. And so that initial assessment is who on campus needs to know about this. And if a determination were to be, you know what, this is an athletics only issue, then we'd sit down and talk through, okay, well, how are we going to take a look into this? I try to stay away from the word investigation. Because if I'm going to use the word investigation, I should be picking up the phone and talking to one of our lawyers. So usually it's, okay, well, how can we assess this? What type of review needs to go into place if it is something that's isolated to athletics?
And what have you found to be the most effective habits when you are communicating with people outside of athletics? Because as you mentioned, what we've seen, those are key stakeholders in all this. And are there specific ways of communication or documentation that you found to be the most effective from that perspective?
Well, documentation is hugely important. There's no question about that. But sometimes I shoot a quick email out. I shoot a quick email, hey, to one of my attorneys. I need to have some concerns have come forward. I need to have a conversation. So that's time dated and stamped.
Yeah.
And then a phone call happens. And then after that phone call, quick recap. Just so that you have it. If you don't have an email trail, then you have to have a place where you're keeping good notes.
Absolutely.
I think, as I said earlier, creating a particular culture of what is the expected behaviors is really important. And as Tanya said, I think, it really depends on the level of kind of where the concern is. And so, I think a lot of athletic directors and sport administrators right now in this time are spending a good amount of time trying to set that expectation and have those conversations between student athletes and coaches of kind of what the daily interaction should be like. And so, being able to have those conversations, but it becomes difficult because the person in that chair, as she said, you have to decide, okay, what do I have to elevate and inform others on campus, and what is just something that, I want to be able to go sit with the sport administrator and the coach and say, hey, this came up, can you explain why this situation was handled that way? Because the more people you do get involved, in particular situations, it sets off a little bit of a panic.
Sure.
And so I think it's critical for each athletic director and SWA and sport administrator to say, okay, what level is this? Because the number of things that you're dealing with today is far, far different than what we were dealing with 10 years ago.
5 years ago.
Yeah, which is a good thing, but
yes,
it takes up a lot more time.
Yeah.
So I want to expand on when there are obviously issues going
Yeah.
on, and every athletic department in the country has issues. You guys are in a unique situation where you're in Washington, D.C., in the heart of D.C., one of the most media-heavy cities in the world. How do you handle when outside press begins to come in and sniff around and investigate? From a PR perspective, are there things that you guys have found to be the most effective if those types of inquiries do come in?
I would say for one of the most important things, and we mentioned this a little while ago, is just at that, if you get a call from media and they're asking questions about stuff in your department, whether you know about it or not, the first thing to do is to get other people. If it's serious, you have to get other people on campus involved. So you have to call your PR people on campus, your general counsel, wherever your direct report is, whether that's the provost or the president or a VP. And so you want to make sure that everyone on campus is aware that this has come across, and you work as a team to decide what is the best position moving forward. How do you deal with this? How do you handle it? And how do you make sure that ultimately that you're looking to what's best for your student athletes and your employees, and the media piece will have to be dealt with at a later date.
Yeah. Anything else?
Sometimes you have to pause, and I think, especially with social media, you'll see stuff written about you, and you want to respond, and sometimes you just have to pause and let it blow up in the media while you're taking care of things appropriately on campus, and recognize there are going to be comments made about you, but that can't drive your decisions. Correct. That can't drive your actions. You really have to almost put plug your ears and put blinders on and really stay focused at the task at hand. And truthfully, the people on campus, the external folks, the public affairs folks, they're usually very good at helping you stay on task and kind of taking care of the media requests. on their own.
This is obviously not media, but one other key stakeholder in these types of situations are outside influencers, parents, former coaches, things along those lines. Have you guys found, through your experiences, ways to navigate when those types of conversations begin and they want to talk to you directly about potential issues or concerns that they have?
I think we all have, I think as an athletic director or as a coach, it's something, and I think that has just become very common. I've always found that it's the conversation in regards to how the relationship should develop and how the communication should go should really be done during the recruiting process. And so when they're making their campus visits, having a conversation with them to remind them that if they're making a choice to come to, in this particular instance, GW, they're in a period of their life of 18 to 22 years old where the son and daughter really need to begin to take ownership of their own decisions and their own communication, and so that needs to be part of it. Now, certainly if there's an emergency and the parent needs to notify you, or if you see a parent at a game, you want to be friendly. But it really is important that the environment be created that the student feels comfortable speaking for themselves. And so if a parent does call and it's not for something that is an emergency, it's something that the son or daughter should have handled alone, I think it's very appropriate to say to that parent, I really appreciate the phone call, and I'll follow up with your son or daughter, and then I'll make sure they follow up with you to keep you updated. So I think you want to be polite, but I think you also want to remember that you're part of this higher education is to prepare them that when they leave your campus, they can do anything they want in the world, and they're afraid of very little. And so that growth of 18 to 22 is really important, and they've come to your university.
Absolutely.
Last question. Obviously, this segment's on risk management. Risk management is one of the most hot topics, themes across the country right now in our industry. Is there one piece of advice that you guys would give other athletic directors, formerly SWAs, so SWAs, when it comes time to truly having a pulse on your department and being able to mitigate some of the worst case scenarios that we've seen our industry ravished with over the last few years?
You have to have a process. And so, we talked about it earlier. One of the steps we took was to make sure that all of our students knew who their sport administrator was. That's one step. Figuring out what tools are out there, what survey mechanisms are out there, what feedback mechanisms are out there. You've got to put something in place. You have to have a process to gather this information, because turning a blind eye is just not the answer. And saying, I didn't know about that is not the answer. And so I would tell every SWA and every AD, figure out what your process is, and make sure then that you implement it and you take good care of it.
Make sure the student athletes know how.
Absolutely.
I would agree. I mean, as Tanya mentioned earlier, you really don't want information on what happened second semester freshman year at the end of their senior year. Senior X interview is wonderful, but you have to have something in place that they know is a tool for them to communicate, and whether that's in person or whether that's anonymously, that something has to be put in place so that they can communicate when something happens, because the longer time goes on, the less likely it's going to be communicated to the AD or the sport administrator. And also, if it does get reported, the ability to get to the truth is a lot easier if it's something that happened that week.
Absolutely. Versus
3 years earlier. So working to find solutions on your campus that if a student athlete or an employee or an alumnus that happens to be around your program, if someone has a bad experience or a good one and they want to share it with you, that ability to share it right away needs to be put into place.
Well, thank you guys again for joining us. This is, like I said, a sensitive issue that's front of mind for everyone, so we appreciate your candor and opening up today and providing your wisdom. Once again, I'm David Chadwick. This is Athletic Director U, and appreciate you guys joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.